Hello, and welcome to Practice Makes Pitch Perfect. I'm Jocelyn Risch, and I wrote Battle of the Butts, which is about 10 animals who do weird things with their butts. My next book, Battle of the Brains, releases in November and is about 10 animals with mind-blowing brain abilities. This session, we're going to use your own brain abilities to craft attention-grabbing pitches. I've heard some writers complain that writing a pitch is tougher than writing the entire book, but I love writing them. It's a fun challenge to figure out the key components and put them together in a way that makes people want to know more. Writing a strong pitch is a necessary skill for a writer, not only for getting the attention of agents and editors, but after your book comes out, you'll always need a pitch ready to go when people ask what you do. What do? Well, I'm a writer. Anything I know? I'm not sure. Then you whip out your awesome pitch so they'll want to read it if they haven't already. A while back, I created a series of video lessons that break down the core elements of a pitch. So I've put them together along with some pitching practice exercises. You'll notice from the wardrobe changes and the references to different days that these were originally spread out over a week. You can watch and practice over a few days or jump in all at once. Now let's get started with the first element. We're going to start off with the most important element of your story, the protagonist. It doesn't matter how original your world building is or how mind-blowing your plot twists are. If your readers or viewers don't care about your protagonist, they won't care about your story. So as we start to write a pitch, we need to identify the protagonist first. That's easy, you say. My protagonist is, Emma Green. Well, yeah, but with these short pitches, every word counts, and a name doesn't tell us anything. Unless you're writing about a famous person or character like Harriet Tubman, Cinderella, Athena, you should leave out the name. Instead, you want to tell us something about the character. And you basically only get 2 words to do it. Maybe 3 if you really need them. So you start with a solid noun. For adult characters, this will often be their job. Writer, hairdresser, dog trainer, spy. And for middle grade and young adult characters, this will often be their age or grade. Teen, 7th grader, 16-year-old. Then you get to jazz it up with an adjective, which should give us some insight into the protagonist's character and personality. Pick an adjective that's specific and vivid, and avoid generalities and cliches. You want to convey as much info as you can as you pair your adjective and your noun. And it's better if the descriptive phrase has to do with the plot. While sugar-addicted Dennis offers an interesting contrast, if the character never eats sweets or talks about teeth in the story, it doesn't give us a sense of the plot, so it doesn't need to be in the pitch. As we go through the challenge, the transmedia mutts are going to help me create a pitch for their very own story. Callie will be our protagonist. The noun choice is easy. She's clearly a unicorn. It's specific and forms a clear picture in our heads. Well, what about the adjective? We could say she's magical. Aren't all unicorns magical? So that doesn't help us differentiate the Callie unicorn. She's obviously adorable. But that doesn't tell us anything about her character. Maybe she's shy? It's a bit generic. How about bashful? Getting better. I usually think of unicorns as bold and haughty, so bashful sets this unicorn apart. But to really make it pop, how about wallflower? It's more unusual and therefore more memorable. And I like the contrast of a beautiful unicorn trying to blend in with the walls. So the protagonist of our story is a wallflower unicorn.
Now it's your turn. It's time for the practice part of the Practice Makes Pitch Perfect. Often, it's easier to write pitches for other stories rather than your own. You know how they say you can't see the forest for the trees? Well, when it comes to your stories, it's not the trees that trip you up, it's the branches, the leaves, and even the veins on the leaves. In your story, everything feels important. So it's easy to get bogged down in details rather than distilling it to the essence of the story. So for our practice sessions, we're going to take a step back and write pitches for stories you know but didn't write. Think about the stories for the last movie you watched, the last novel you read, whether it was adult, young adult, or middle grade, and the last picture book you read. This will give you a variety of links and structures to practice on. Now, take a few minutes and write a small, concise description of the protagonists in each of these stories.
So yesterday we started with the most important part of your story, protagonist. Today we're going to talk about the next crucial element. What does your protagonist want? What is their main goal during the course of your story? This is what drives them, and therefore drives the story, and therefore should drive the pitch. Even if there's a lot going on in your story, you should be able to boil it down to one core goal. Like, what's getting them out of bed in the morning? What's prompting them to take action? What is it that's keeping them from spending the day on the couch, watching Netflix and eating popcorn? Basically, what does the finish line look like for them? Depending on what category or genre you're writing, the protagonist's goal might be as minor as retrieving a cookie from the highest shelf, or as major as saving the world from destruction. No matter what it is, reaching the goal must be important to the protagonist, and we should want to see them succeed. Like we talked about yesterday, you should use as few words as possible to state this goal, and you should avoid generalities and cliches. Saving the world sounds like a big, exciting goal, but it's generic, and therefore kind of boring. Why does the world need saving? Is the universe about to collapse in on itself? Is a madman about to launch nuclear weapons? Or is a virus about to wipe out all humans? So let's say it's the virus. Then what is the protagonist's goal in this situation? Are they coming up with the cure themselves? Or are they tasked with locating the cure's key ingredient? Or maybe they're protecting the scientists who are coming up with the cure. Or maybe they're responsible for assassinating the person who plans to release the virus. Even though each of these possible goals involves saving humans from a deadly virus, each goal results in a very different story. And each goal impacts the way we view the protagonist. Basically, it's all connected. So it's important to paint a picture in our mind so we can clearly see how the story might unfold, all while being as concise as possible. So let's think about our wallflower unicorn from yesterday. What kind of goal might she have? Well, it turns out she has an amazing singing voice, and she really wants to win Animal Idol. And this kind of puts her core personality trait in conflict with her main goal. So now we have the start of pitch. A wallflower unicorn aspires to win Animal Idol.
Now it's your turn to describe the goal of the protagonist. Using the movie, novel, and picture book you used before, take a few minutes to clearly and concisely describe the goal of each of the protagonists.
So we've covered the protagonist and their goal, so what's next? Well, every good story needs a villain. Sometimes the villain is actually more interesting than the hero, like with Hannibal Lecter or the Joker. But we don't want to let the antagonist overshadow our protagonist in the pitch. So keep the description short and sweet. And once again, use specific and vivid words and avoid generalities and cliches. You don't want your protagonist defeating the bad guys. They should be defeating someone like the loafing coworker who stole their clients. Sometimes your antagonist is not a specific person, but something more general. Like in our virus example from yesterday. If the virus just mutated on its own with no one setting it in motion, then the virus is the antagonist. Or like think about a zombie story. The antagonist might be all the zombies in general, or it might be one specific zombie stalking our protagonist. Or again, let's think about our protagonist from yesterday who wants a cookie. They could have a number of antagonists. The high shelf might be a general antagonist, or it might be more specific, like their health-conscious mother. Or maybe there's a mouse competing with the protagonist to snag the cookie before they can get to it. The antagonist might even be within the protagonist, like a major fear or a character flaw, so they have to fight themselves. So again, going back to our cookie bandit, it might be they have a major fear of heights, which they must fight. So for your pitch, you need to identify the main person or thing preventing the protagonist from reaching their goal, and then describe them clearly and concisely. So getting back to our unicorn story, it could be that the antagonist is the unicorn's own fear of the spotlight. They're a wallflower, so they don't want to be in the spotlight, so they have to fight that fear. But I think it'll be more exciting if we put her in conflict with another contestant. A contestant who will do anything to win. How about a lion? Well, it's fun to say, but I think we can be more descriptive. Maybe a hungry for fame lion. Yeah, I think that gives us a better picture of the personality of the antagonist. And thank you to Remy for being willing to play the villain, even though she's a sweetie pie in real life. So now our pitch is, a wallflower unicorn aspires to win an animal idol, but a hungry for fame lion conspires to defeat her.
Now it's time to practice defining the antagonist. So for the movie, novel, and picture book you selected, clearly and concisely, and with no cliches, describe the antagonist of the stories.
Okay, so during the first 3 days, we cover the core elements of a pitch: protagonist, goal, and antagonist. You could stop there and have a pretty serviceable pitch, like the one the pups have created. A wallflower unicorn aspires to win animal idol, but a hungry for fame lion plans to defeat her. But who wants to be just serviceable? Not us! We want our pitches to be special. So the next element is to add stakes. Tell us what's at risk if your protagonist does not reach their goal. Or add a ticking time bomb so that your protagonist is racing the clock to reach their goal. Or add both! Stakes and time limits add urgency to the story. And by adding them to the pitch, you add tension, and we want to know what's going to happen next. That sense of urgency is a great way to get people to ask for more info about your story. And I know I sound like a broken record, but keep it short and use specific and vivid language. Or else everyone dies is extremely urgent stakes, but or everyone dissolves into gelatinous goo is a lot more memorable. In the example from our transmedia mutts, what are the stakes for the cow unicorn? If she's such a wallflower, why does she want to sing on an animal idol in the first place? And why should we care if she wins or not? Sure, she's cute, but the Remy lion is just as cute. Well, it turns out the unicorn's father is dying and needs surgery. But to pay for the surgery, she needs the prize money from Animal Idol. Oh no, her dad will die if she doesn't win? Now we really want her to win. And we really hate that lion each time she does something that sabotages the unicorn. We're much more invested in her success than we were when it was just about her winning for the fun of it. So now we have a wallflower unicorn is desperate to win Animal Idol to pay for her dad's life-saving surgery, but a hungry for fame lion conspires to defeat her.
It's your turn again. This time we're practicing defining stakes. For the movie and books you've been using, what are the main stakes of the story? Take a few minutes and describe the stakes in an attention-grabbing way, something that will make people really want to read the story to find out what happens.
Today, we're going to talk about adding setup or background info to your pitches. Not all pitches will need this extra setup, but some will. You'll have to make that call as you craft your pitch. Do we need an extra bit of info to understand what's happening? Fantasy and science fiction stories most likely need some extra setup to give a brief explanation about the world. What factors make it different enough to affect the plot? Think of this as the "in a world" from movie trailers. In a world where vampires outnumber humans. In a world where the inhabitants of Mars struggle to stay hidden from NASA. In a world where magic is currency. In a world where eye color determines your job choices. You might also need some setup if you're talking about some point in history, or if the location is important to the plot, like in Egypt in 2000 BC, or in France during World War II, or in Saudi Arabia, a woman dresses as a boy to get a job. You might also need a quick bit of background info if your protagonist has a psychological, personal, or physical history that impacts the plot. After witnessing the murder of his parents as a child, when a head injury steals her ability to speak, while fighting a debilitating fear of the dark. If you think we need to know specific background for your world or protagonist to fully understand the story, then work it into the pitch. But yet again, be brief and use specific and strong language. Going back to our example with our transmedia mutts, we've already worked in some world building since we know unicorns and lions compete in a singing competition. So let's have our setup be a bit more background about our unicorn protagonist. Maybe there's some bad history between her and her dad that makes it even more important for her to save his life. So how about,
after wrongly accusing her dad of causing her mom's death, a wallflower unicorn is desperate to win Animal Idol to pay for his life-saving surgery, but a hungry-for-fame lion conspires to defeat her.
So wow, yeah, this story about an adorable unicorn has taken a really dark turn. But I hope this shows how the right piece of background information can up the ante of the entire pitch. I also hope this exercise of building the unicorn pitch over the past 5 days has shown how helpful creating a pitch can be before you write your story. If you figure out the main elements and how each component impacts and intensifies everything else, you create a roadmap for a viable story, even if you're a pantser at heart like me.
And now it's your turn to think about setup. Do any of the 3 stories you've been working with need setup to make the pitch clear? If not, skip this part. If so, take a few minutes to craft some quick and clear phrasing to set up the world the story takes place in.
Once you include the necessary components of a pitch, another thing to consider is the this meets that formula. This is when you give a general picture of your story by combining one book or movie with another book or movie. You don't want this meets that to be the only part of your pitch, but it can make an impactful opening or closing. For example, in this Nancy Drew meets Sherlock Holmes mystery, a know-it-all teen must solve her neighbor's murder before the killer moves in on her family. Or, after a family vacation to the moon, a resourceful 10-year-old must figure out how to survive after his parents forget him on the lunar surface. It's The Martian meets Home Alone. And there are other ways to phrase it rather than just it's X meets Y. You could say crossed, like it's Trimmers crossed with Boss Baby. Or pick a character and add them to a different story. For example, this story is like if Laura Croft went through the looking glass. Or even something similar to if these 2 stories had a baby. Like if Forrest Gump and the Da Vinci Code had a baby, it would be this story. With our unicorn pitch, we might say it's Sing meets Heist. From Heist, it's the element of a desperate person doing anything to save a loved one in the hospital. And then from Sing, it's the element of animals participating in an American Idol type contest. No matter what type of story you're pitching, you can use examples from different categories. So a book pitch can include movies or TV shows, and vice versa. The key is to find story examples that fit the tone of your story, and don't worry about the medium. But this method comes with some caveats to be careful. You don't want to pick the most wildly successful examples to use because it could indicate you have unrealistic expectations or even that you don't know many other books or movies in your genre besides the famous ones. But at the same time, don't pick obscure examples no matter how perfectly they fit your story, because if someone doesn't know your examples, they can't form a picture in their head. And also don't just pick 2 stories because crossing them together would sound cool and grab attention. People will be put off if they can't see the titles they thought they might like in your story. Another risk of using this method is that you might confuse people. You might pick The Sixth Sense as one of your examples because you have a mind-blowing twist at the end. But many people will see that and expect ghosts in the story. So make sure you're picking examples based on the associations most people will have and not something more ambiguous. There's also the risk that a person will have a negative association with the comparison you use. You might think The Hangover is hilarious and therefore a perfect comp title. But for the agent you just pitched, Bradley Cooper looks exactly like the boyfriend who cruelly dumped her in college. She's already mentally saying no to your pitch. So there's definitely risk with this technique, but also potential reward. Author Ursula Vernon shared a story about tweeting the worst elevator pitch, and then an editor seeing that pitch, contacting her, and eventually buying the book. That tweet was, "It's the Blair Witch Project meets the Andy Griffith Show." It's such an offbeat pairing that you really want to know more. But let's say that editor had been one of those people who suffered from severe motion sickness while they watched Blair Witch, then this anecdote might have a completely different ending. So give careful consideration to using this option, and choose wisely when selecting your example stories. So if you decide not to include a this meets that comparison in your pitch, you should still really have one in mind, and that way if people ask more questions, you can always pull it out then.
Now back to you to practice some this meets that combos. Pretend like you're the writer of the story, sitting at your desk writing the query letter to send to agents. What comp titles would you use for the stories you've been working with? And now that you have all the pieces, Put them together and smooth out the wording in a way that creates an "I must read more" pitch.
Okay, now that we've covered all the elements of a successful pitch, we're going to touch on a few other general tips when you're pitching. So, first of all, don't reveal the ending in the pitch, even if it's a super cool twist. Actually, especially if it's a super cool twist. You want the reader to be surprised when they get to it. The point of a pitch is to entice someone to read more, not tell them the entire story. And if you're worried your story isn't interesting enough without mentioning the twist, you need to do some more plotting so the story journey to the twist is interesting on its own merits. Depending on the threads you pull out of a story and the words you choose to describe those threads, you can build very different depictions of your story. As you write your pitches, you can experiment with different elements of your story and see what leads to the most compelling pitch and play around with the words. You just keep trying things to see what sounds good. For example, Rick Polito wrote this pitch in 1998 as a description on the TCM listing for The Wizard of Oz. Transported to a surreal landscape, a young girl kills the first person she meets and then teams up with three strangers to kill again. What? I mean, when I read it, it totally blew my mind because it's like everything is technically accurate, but it gives a completely different impression of what the movie actually is. So take this in mind when you're creating your pitch. You can use words and the threads to create a very exciting story, but be careful because you don't want to mislead everyone. You may be tempted to make your story sound like it's more actiony or exciting and adventurous, hoping to draw people in. But if you set up false expectations, an agent or editor or even a reader will feel let down or disappointed when they read your story. Like if your pitch leads them to think it's a funny family vacation movie and it turns out to be a serial killer horror movie, when they read the full story, you're going to leave them with a bad taste in their mouth, no matter how entertaining and well written your story is. And this, if it's an agent or editor, they won't request. If it's a reader, they might leave you a bad review. So you don't want to set bad expectations or false expectations. You want to be accurate to your story, but search for the threads and the words that will lead to the most exciting part of your story. Okay, so some questions I get are about like how should you handle multiple points of view or dual timelines? So my brilliant, mind-blowing answer is it depends. To keep things simple, it's probably easier to focus on one character or one timeline. Pick the character or timeline with the most exciting goal, the most thrilling arc, the most terrifying antagonist, and run with that one when writing your pitch. But it might be that your dual timelines or the way your POV characters interact is the most hooky part of your pitch or story. In that case, you want to try to blend them in your pitch. It should feel like one cohesive story rather than two separate stories glued together in a pitch. So for multiple timelines, something like in 1718, a brilliant female writer churns out stories she can never publish. 300 years later, a talentless hack unearths them and uses them to accomplish his publishing dreams. So you have these two different timelines, but you've put them together in a way you can see how they're connected. And they're not just boop and boop, you connect them. Or like, let's say the Hunger Games was told in alternating POVs, point of views between Katniss and Peeta. You might have something like, when forced to compete in an annual battle to the death, pragmatic Katniss will do what it takes to win, while a smitten Peeta will sacrifice everything to ensure she survives. As they eliminate the other contestants, love blossoms, guaranteeing a heartbreaking final battle. So I don't talk about all the government things and the political aspects of the story or her family, a lot of them that show up in the main story. I just focus on how the games impact interactions between Katniss and Peeta. And in this example, I also use their names. which often makes it easier when you're focusing on more than one protagonist in a pitch. So, it's one of those things, it's a rule. It's not a rule, it's a guideline, right? So if it makes sense to use names, use names. If it doesn't, then use more general descriptions. And if you have more of an ensemble novel, you can frame the pitch around the group. Something like 3 antisocial mice must work together to defeat the crafty cat who has constructed booby traps all over the house. So in this case, it doesn't matter the personality of one mouse, it's 3 mice are working together. Or something like a group of aliens from various solar systems must abandon the war they've been fighting for centuries to figure out how to defeat the dark cloud that is consuming galaxies. So again, it's a group of people coming together rather than a specific person or animal or whatever. So again, you have to think about your story and what will lend itself to the best pitch. These are not hard and fast rules. These are guidelines to help you create something that will grab people's attention. So what I'm basically saying is it boils down to whatever makes your story pop the most. Experiment with one character timeline, then another, and combine until you have an irresistible pitch. And I know I'm kind of beating a dead horse with this at this point, or maybe call it a dead unicorn. I don't know. But it's so important. Every word in a pitch counts. So make them important. Cut the fluff. Ban the generic. Proposing your pitch as a tweet is actually a good idea, even if you're not going to participate in any of the Twitter pitching events that aren't really happening anymore. But anyway, because it keeps you within a strict character limit. If your pitch is too long for a tweet, it's probably too long for an elevator ride, and therefore too long to keep someone's attention unless they have specifically asked for more. Then make sure you're using the strongest words you can to paint word pictures in people's heads. But on the flip side, don't go too wild with big words. You want them to be vivid words, but not long or obscure or just wacky for the sake of it. If people have to consult a dictionary to know what you mean, or you come across as pretentious for using a bunch of $5 words, then you're making it much harder on yourself to sell your story. It's about being specific and creating word pictures, not regurgitating the thesaurus. Now, this is a very silly example, but let's say a part of your pitch is, if she doesn't return home by midnight, her skin will turn a bright color. Bright color is generic, so you want to use something more vivid. But using a more vivid word does not mean you should now say, if she doesn't return home by midnight, her skin will turn vermilion. It looks clunky in a short written pitch, and you might trip over the syllables if you're saying it out loud. Even now, I'm not sure if I said it right. So instead, keep it simple. If she doesn't return home by midnight, her skin will turn red. It's vivid because the reader can immediately picture it in their head, and you don't come across as trying too hard. So use your thesaurus to switch words in and out until you have something that reads smoothly. But don't go overboard. As with so many things when it comes to writing a pitch, it's all about experimenting to find that balance of clear, concise, and intriguing. Okay, so here's some more practice. We've been practicing all along, but now let's kind of put some of our practicing together. All right, so think about this pitch. A person wants to be with the person they love, but the families keep them apart. It's clear and concise. It's very vague, but it is clear and concise. It includes a protagonist, her goal, their goal, could be his goal. It includes a protagonist, their goal, and antagonist. But it's so generic, which means it's so boring. This pitch doesn't tell us much because it can apply to so many stories. Think about how many stories you know that you've read or watched somewhere that this can apply to. So let's break it down into pieces and come up with some interesting alternatives. First, our protagonist is a person. So think about it, go through it, and think about a more vivid description. Ideally, an adjective and a noun. Okay. Their goal is to be with the person they love. So that's their goal. So think about it. What is an interesting way you can word that goal? And then the antagonist is the family who is keeping them apart. So what could you do to make that less generic and more specific? So sit down, think about it, and I would actually advise you to do 3 of those. Do 3 different versions though. Sit down, come up with 3 different versions of this very generic pitch and make them specific and interesting. And so go out there, sit down and do it. So just as an example, here's one I came up with. A love-struck mouse is lured into a dinner date by a charming cat, but her family traps her in a cage to keep her from becoming the main course. So it's all very specific language. Whether you think you'll like the story or not, you may like it, you may not. I don't know. But it forms a very specific picture in your head. So you can know whether you think this will be the story for you or not. Okay, so here we go. Here's my spider pup. I'm going to see if I can play it. Hold on, here we go.
The itsy bitsy spider went up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. Out came the sun and dried up all the rain. Then the itsy bitsy spider went up the spout again.
Okay, so this is Kinsey, my little puppers, and obviously, I'm obsessed with her, and I even tried dressing her in costume, so I dressed her as a spider in this one. But as you can see, the song itself gives us a pretty solid pitch. An itsy bitsy spider wants to climb up a water spout, but the rain washes it away. So think about this. How can we jazz it up? We can make this snazzier. So sit down, take some time. What adjectives, what specific language, what little pieces of pop can you do to make this a much more attention-grabbing pitch? Oops, sorry. All right, I got another Kinsey. Okay, oops, that was okay, I went too far. Okay, so I'm hoping that most of you have seen the Disney version of The Little Mermaid with Sebastian, who is maybe a crab, maybe a lobster, depending on who you ask, but we'll just call him a crustacean. So I have crustacean Kinsey here to inspire a nice exercise. So for this one, let's create a pitch as if Sebastian is the main character instead of Ariel, and the story is from his point of view. So you have Sebastian as the protagonist. How would you describe him? A romantic crustacean, a talented crustacean, a loyal crustacean, and you don't have to use crustacean. You can go shrimp or lobster or whatever he is. I'm not even sure. I just know he's adorable and I love him. Okay, so now you need to suggest wording on the goal. So does he want to entertain the world with his songs? Does he want to save his best friend from being in prison? What does Sebastian want? So keep it simple and then figure it out. So what is his goal? Maybe he wants to save his best friend from being turned into a worm creature and imprisoned. Then we have an antagonist. Who is Sebastian's antagonist? Is the sea witch enough? Or do we want to get some adjectives in there? Fabulous sea witch, diabolical sea witch, a witch octopus hybrid. What sounds good? What flows well as you read it, either on the page or you say it out loud if you're pitching in person. And so I would say we definitely need a ticking clock with this one. So let's put some things together and we'll say, this is just my suggestion. A loyal crustacean only has 3 days to save his princess best friend from being turned into a worm creature and imprisoned by a sea witch who wants to steal the throne. That's a great pitch. It's kind of intriguing, and it would tell the story from his point of view. So you can see that there's all these things you can switch in and out to figure out what your pitch sounds like.
Woohoo! Woohoo! You're now a pitch writing champ. You know, the crucial elements of a compelling pitch are the protagonist, their goal, and an antagonist or an antagonistic force keeping the protagonist from their goal. You know, you can turbo boost a pitch by including stakes and or a ticking time bomb. You know that some pitches can be strengthened by adding setup about the world or critical background info about the protagonist. You know the potential benefits and pitfalls of a this meets that comparison. And you know how important it is to use strong, vivid language and to avoid generalities and cliches. You've practiced creating a variety of pitches with all kinds of prompts. So it's time. It's time to finally create a pitch for your own story. Yay! Yay, right? Remember to focus on the key elements. Don't let your plot overwhelm you. Don't let your passion for certain aspects of the story distract you. Experiment with different factors as you craft your pitch. You've totally got this. Callie knows it too. You've totally got this. And remember to have fun with it. I know there's a lot of pressure associated with pitching, since the right pitch can open doors for you. It can make you feel anxious about getting it perfect. But do your best to ignore that pressure and enjoy yourself as you brainstorm and craft the pitch, because that fun will come through in the pitch.
Are you now ready to have fun creating pitches? It's kind of like putting a puzzle together, except you also have to create the puzzle pieces before you can put them together. But it will all be worth it when you feel the pieces click into place and know you have a winning pitch. Make sure to run it by a few people who have read the story, as well as by a few people who haven't. People familiar with the story can help make sure you've covered the strongest aspects, while unfamiliar folks can point out information holes that might not be spotted by people who've read it. Now take a deep breath and create a pitch for your story. Good luck.